Steele, I want to open up with a very hot topic.
Okay.
Avowed showed really, really well during Gamescom. I think, and again, I'm speaking for myself, there wasn't anything about the game that I did not say, holy shit, I cannot wait to play this in 2025. Why can't I play it now? So what I really kind of want to curtail is this idea, at least from this channel, that just because 30 frames doesn't bother me doesn't mean that it's up for criticism. Right? That I want that to be completely clear. Now, I played Starfield at 30 and loved every minute of the 5+ days I played. I played Dragon's Dogma at 30, no problem. Hellblade 2, 30, no problem. Even Avowed at 30, and well, it had its problems, but I still played through it. Now, I'm a console guy. I don't make any excuses for it. I don't have a PC. I have means to get one, but I don't care to because I am a console guy.
Well, you shouldn't have to. Yeah.
Right? So when I say, Steel, 30 frames for Avowed is not going to bother me one iota, rest assured that, well, that's the truth. I'm not capping for Obsidian, but I will say that there is room for criticism. Now, if you are in the camp of someone that was sold next generation as being, well, you know, Aaron Greenberg, the tweet continues to come up, standard fare moving forward is going to be 60 frames per second, right? I mean, he said it in the tweet, and that continues to make the rounds. Well, a lot of games aren't launching at 60 frames, some of which are not launching with modes that give you the ability to play at 60, 1440p. And again, right on your screen right now is a perfect example of that. The new Monster Hunter that's coming out by Capcom.
Wilds?
Yeah, it's 30 frames. That's been confirmed. Now, again, I don't have a problem with the games in 30. I prefer the high fidelity graphics over the 60 frames, but that's just me. But still, this is one of those situations where you're starting to see a very massive divide. Like, there are a lot of people in my camp that are saying, hey, boom, 30 is okay with me. I want the high fidelity. I want the detailed areas, the world, the characters, the lighting. And you know what? Again, for me, that's okay. But I do think, and again, folks, the game does not release for an additional 6 months. We still have 6 months before that game releases, or 5.5, give or take, depending on the week. They could very well add the 144060, because remember, during that interview when they confirmed for 30, they said the last thing that they do is put the extra work into the frames.
Right.
They wanted 30, they got it to 30. That's what they said that they wanted. But I believe that even though they haven't admitted this, and no one is talking about this, Steele, that the delay until February of 2025 may in fact have been because of how crowded the fall is going to be for new releases. Right. I honestly believe in my heart of heart it was in fact to address the 60 frame per second crowd that is going to make their opinions known, and well, they have. Let's get into your thoughts about that 30 versus 60.
Well, I'm of the mind that no matter what, people should stand for whatever they believe in, right? If you think that 30 frames is good enough, then cool. I'm not here to sway your opinion, change your mind, make you believe something that I believe or anything like that. But my perspective is we are in X console generation now. Things are supposed to be more consistent than ever. We're on very similar platforms with our competitors now. There should be ways to at least set a new standard, right? And I thought that that's what this generation was going to more so be about, once we started finding out that both consoles were very similar to each other. There wasn't much else out there that could separate them out. So what do? Well, let's start focusing in on performance. Now, as we've seen this whole console generation, performance has been very lackluster, getting more games that aren't releasing completely, or aren't performance friendly or not optimized properly. Even to your point, which you were talking about Star Wars Outlaws earlier. I hadn't seen none of the bad gameplay yet. I heard some stuff about the AI, which is something that does bother me and would turn me off of a game. So to see things like that still happen lets me know that there's something else fundamentally wrong. For me, 60 FPS needs to be the only mandate that I personally believe that should exist in the gaming industry as of 2018. Reason being is because no matter what, whether you think that single player games play better at 30 or you want more visual fidelity, there is nothing saying that you still cannot have your visual fidelity. And again, the thing that people go to is, oh, I'd rather have the 4K. You're not getting 4K now. Right. Point blank, period. You haven't got it since the beginning of this generation. You're only getting 4K on older games that are being up-res to 4K. Right now, we're still getting new games that are being upscaled to 4K. So if we're not getting the native resolution in these games, then I think there's something else that is much more obvious that needs to be focused on. And I think from the very beginning of development, and again, I'm not a game designer. If I was, that would be one of my main pillars that I would stand on, because for me, the feeling that you get from playing a game separates it out from what you get visually. Right now, they both go very well hand in hand with each other. But since 60 frame games have started becoming more relevant in these high quality production, AAA budget style games, even AA style games, it is hard to argue, at least in my eyes, that, oh, well, 30 is better than 60. I'd rather sacrifice the way that this game feels because I'd rather it look pretty. Now, again, for me as a gamer, somebody who puts my hands on the controller and I am controlling whatever character in whatever world and whatever space, again, it is very hard for me to believe somebody tell me that 30 feels better than 60 does. That is incorrect. You are misplaced. And I get if you are okay with it, but that is something completely different than what the truth is, right? So for me, Avowed possibly not being 60 FPS on launch is another sign of just the times that we're in currently, right? There is obviously something off within the dev cycle, whether it's at the top or whatever. But again, we're getting more devs. Even shout out to God Howard, shout out to my boy, my guy Pong, who refers him as the God. Even Todd Howard says that he would rather have games at 30 FPS because of the visual fidelity. Again, please show me where Starfield is 4K 30 consistently on console. Okay. And then once you show me that, also show me how all of a sudden, when I was told from the very beginning that 60 FPS probably wasn't going to be possible on Starfield until we got the next generation boxes and they upscaled they changed the processor. You need more graphical power and they're just doing so much. Now we got the Series S even doing, and before they did the official update, we had a mod for the Series S to play 60 FPS without any real changes to the resolution. It was still at 1080p. Maybe even a little bit higher from what I was seeing in these mods. And this is on console. These are console mods. I'm not talking about on PC. So again, it may just be a personal thing for most people on what you prefer and what you value more than the other thing. And again, I'm not here to debate what you value over another thing. But as somebody that has been a gamer for a long time, who favors action-oriented combat, who understands that the feeling of your games, because we are not in a medium where I would rather watch the majority of my gameplay or it feel somewhat sluggish, because this is not a QTE ridden game. This isn't a Netflix game where it's not that. I always will lean on the side of the feeling of playing your games, of being more important. And again, there's frame timing that goes into there as well. And sure, tightening up frame times. And again, these are things that most people aren't going to care about. But I do agree is equally as important. But let's aim for 60 and nail those frame times down if the developers find those things important. I just want us as gamers to start getting more of what I've always believed was important, was getting some of those minor details for the gamer, so that you have more of that connection to whatever world that you end up putting yourself in, right? That instant connection of, man, when I press a button, it does this. When I do this, it does this. When I'm walking through here, it feels good. Everything transitions very naturally. There isn't a micro stutter here. Even if it is optimized the best on, again, shout out to my brother Pong, who said even on console, 30 FPS for Starfield, it felt good. Speaks to frame timing. They got it right. But when they released that 60 FPS update, I saw so many people say it feels like a completely different game, because that's just what it does. First or third person, there is that feeling of difference. And I just want people to kind of keep that in mind as they move into the future. You can have some of both, but keep in mind, you're not, every time that you speak to, oh, I'd rather have visual fidelity, please ask yourself, when are we not getting games that are not being upscaled, or are we not getting games that are not their native resolution, or whatever the case. So yeah, man, that's kind of my insight on it. I don't think that Avowed is being pushed back for that. It could very well be the reason that they stated, hey, it's crowded. Oh, hey, we want you to do your backlog. Again, I like to step back more into the honesty side of things, and I'd have to take them at their face value. But for me,
yeah, I mean, that's fair. That's definitely fair.
For me, it just tells me that, hey, they needed more time. They wanted to make sure to polish this up. And if they have the time to do it, you might as well give them the time to do it. So,
what are your thoughts on the very, very blatant divide with the community when it comes to 30 versus 60? Because there are a lot of people that are in the camp of, I wanted to feel better. I want to feel good at 60. And people like me, who honestly, no excuses, I don't care. I like the detailed fidelity. I like everything looking like it's a movie that I'm playing, and you get that at 30 frames. So again, playing through all these other games that were 30 frames were not a problem for me. This won't be for me an issue. And I got to say this, and this is not taking or making any excuses. If you are that strung up or hung up on the 60 frames, you probably either are already playing on PC, or you probably should be. Let's get your hot take, man.
Well, I kind of agree with that last point, but it is a tough balance. And from the community standpoint, there's always going to be this divide, because most people are going to enjoy the games at 30 frames, or I would say the majority. Us enthusiasts or the vocal crowd that prefer to have it in 60 and would love for the console games to have that as the core standard moving forward, especially throughout this generation. I think unfortunately we're not the majority, or Xbox or even some of the third party publishers aren't really listening. And I don't know how else for us to get this message across, because you'll hear comments like the devs are like, oh, they wanted this in this creative vision, but yet that only exists on console. It's not like they forced it on PC. They'll say things like, oh, well, we don't, we feel that, a lot of people want to play at 30 frames, or this is, the best possible for first person perspective and whatnot. And it's like, deep down, I think some of these people actually know that may not be true, or know that it's not true. But I think on the priority list of what things are getting done by them, that's probably at the bottom of the list. Like, the publisher wants to get the game out there. If it functions, great. We'll sell copies. You guys can, based on how many copies we sell, you may get the overtime to continue working on getting the 60 frames thing. And I don't know any other way other than a lot of us that prefer the 60, other than moving to PC, are ever going to get this in console. Because I think even with the next generation of console, you still have devs, and I point this finger squarely at Remedy, but there are other devs that do this same thing. Rockstar is kind of guilty of this as well, where the more power you give them in these consoles, the more they're going to turn up all of the other stuff, the specular lighting, the particle effects, and all of that. So no matter what, next generation will probably still have 30 frame games, and that's aside from Grand Theft Auto 6, because like I said, those studios typically will push all of the other limits, and the frame rate, as long as they can get the pacing down, that's good enough. The PC crowd, when they eventually release, something like Grand Theft Auto 6 on PC, you'll probably have to have a beast of a machine to do it at 60, or you'll have to turn things down to like 1080 and just to upscale from there type of deal. But in the grand scheme of things, I think the priority list for the publishers and maybe even the devs direct is just to get the game complete. Make sure whatever, like from the publisher standpoint, make sure whatever monetization stuff is in their, forefront and ready to go and functioning. Make sure that the game is functioning so you're not getting a whole bunch of purchases and then returns. Although PlayStation doesn't have to worry about that because they tend to deny returns or refunds. But, in the grand scheme of things, I think it just comes down to us as enthusiasts either have to be vocal in a different way, whether that means delaying the purchase. But then again, Microsoft being this company of numbers, I always look at the numbers that they sometimes focus on as bad data to some extent. And an example of this would be the DVR, because you remember early on, they were talking about, well, people don't use the DVR, but they're not looking at the bigger picture of why they're not using the DVR. If the DVR is broken or not functioning as well as it is on other platforms, then why are people going to use it? But if they just see that people aren't using it, they assume that, it's not a popular, feature, or that people don't want it. And much like if we, let's say we delay purchasing the games until they have the 60 frame, option or performance mode or something like that, then they'll say, well, maybe, this player base isn't interested in this style of game, instead of looking at, no, we're only delaying the purchase because you didn't have it, in our eyes, complete out the door. Mm-hmm. And for me, when it comes to delaying a game, I would prefer, if they're going to delay a game, well, actually, backing up a little bit, I really wish, not, and this is not just for Xbox, this is just for any game publisher in general, I really wish they wouldn't talk about release dates until they know they have like a lot of the basics buttoned up. And it's just a matter of, the polishing phase, kind of like what Nintendo does in general. Like, you don't hear a lot from them until the stuff is pretty close to the finish line. And I know us as gamers, we get annoyed and we fuss on the internet about not hearing when there's a release date or when they're going to show this game or what's the update. But to some extent, I kind of wish that they would wait, because now, instead of talking about all the great stuff of Avowed, like every time they show that game, it looks better. But now we're focusing on the 60 versus 30. And yes, once again, it's not that it's not everybody is focused on it. A lot of us are still looking at the overall, the story, the choices and things like that as the important parts. But right, I'm going to probably play it on PC just for the fact that 60 frames, although, but I'm also going to play it in third person. So I could probably get away with playing at 30 on my Series X and not have much of a problem, as long as it's as smooth as what Starfield was at launch. But now that I have a PC, it's kind of like, well, I want all the bells and whistles. I want the ray tracing and I want the 60 frames. If that means I have to scale it down to 1080 and upscale to my 1440 monitor, so be it. So that way I can get the ray tracing and everything on it and have it at 60, or maybe I can bump it up to 90. And in a lot of cases, it's weird to me that, people can mod like Starfield. There were like Steele said, there was a mod for, and I knew this was going to happen when people were like, oh, well, it'll be a year before they have 60 frames. Well, it kind of was for the official one, but I said it would be like less than 2 months. And it was around that time frame where we had that on console. Like it's funny to me that modders can not outdo, but at least beat the actual dev company or the devs to the punch as far as 60 frames. But then again, Their priority was to work on the expansion. Their priority was to work on some of the additions and quality of life stuff, which is great. I'm not going to fault them on that, but it's almost like gamers as a whole, not just PC, but console, should start nudging more and more of the casual, like, hey, here's what the differences are when it's at 60 versus 30. Like, for a lot of people, I hate to use this analogy, but me being the car enthusiast I am, you don't know how good a Ferrari is until you drive one. So if you're not driving a Ferrari, you're just driving, let's say, your Mustang. You think it's fast as heck. It's an awesome car. It's great. And don't get me wrong, I love Mustangs. I've had several myself, but
it's different.
You drive that Ferrari one time, you look at that Mustang totally different.
Not even compared.
And until you have to pay the insurance bill or service bill or something like that. But in all honesty, that's kind of the problem that gaming is going to have until a majority or the casuals and even some that are enthusiasts that don't focus on the frame rate. They just might focus on the story, because there are some that just they love the engagement of the story, or they love the actual combat, even if it's not Twitch quick type of combat. That's going to be one of those things that, as a whole, until we get to that point where even the casuals and those that don't care about the frame rate start saying something, which it's going to be like pulling teeth at that point, these devs aren't going to change their priorities. The publishers definitely aren't going to change their priorities, because that means more money in costs of development and probably longer time before they can get a return on investment. So I lean towards 60 frames being that should have been the standard. They kind of, Greenberg kind of hinted to it. Unfortunately, everybody's going to quote tweet them or quote them on that. And unfortunately, nobody sent that memo to the devs. But hey, it is what it is. But I encourage those that do want 60, start looking at building that PC, because it's not going to probably change even with the next generation. Like I said, devs are going to always push the limits of what the game can do with AI, have more AI on screen, or better, shadows and things like that. Other things that will cost processing power, they'll focus on that all before frame rate. At least for some, well, I would say many devs. There are some devs that seem to prioritize frame rate. Like Capcom seems to be one that prioritizes, although Monster Hunter is not one of those games. So I guess it depends on what they're working on or how big of a scale the game is and stuff. But I just wish this was like, I'm hoping with it being delayed till February, which it made sense to move it out of the way of other things and have it where we have a nice launch to 2025. I just hope they have the 60 frames patch ready to go, and then all of this will go for naught at that point. But we'll see.